This is like the Marvel movie of progressive metal albums, except really creative and fresh. Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and it's time for a big review. This is a big one. We got the atmospheric, melodic gent specialists TesseracT with their fifth album, War of Being. TesseracT have been one of my favorite metal bands of the last 10 years, alongside Haken and Opeth and Mastodon, even though they're not really in the same category as any of those three. They came out swinging in 2010 with the album One, where they set this very sleek tone with a almost futuristic and otherworldly seriousness to their music. It's like our idea of aliens that they never laugh. It sounded like TesseracT knew some epic truth about the universe that was hidden from us mere mortals. But I fell for the second album, Altered State, which was my introduction to the band and just remains a very euphoric experience for me. Ash O'Hara, I think, was just the perfect fill-in for the band with his heavenly high range set to some of the most beautiful, gorgeous vocal melodies in metal music, period. And that's a theme for the band. Vocals are not an afterthought, and melody and composition are central. And yet another strength of the band, besides melody, besides composition, is atmosphere and production. So yeah, they got a lot going for them. They've always balanced the earth-shattering gent riffage with atmospheric, droning tones and delicious sound design. And this continued on the album Polaris, which I might even like a little more than Altered State. And, it's an album that saw the return of Daniel Tompkins on the vocals. And at the time, that was really disappointing to me just because of how much I liked Ash O'Hara's voice. But Dan won me over with some brilliant performances like the songs Hexes and Tourniquet with such glorious tension and release in those songs. And I'm sad to say I didn't get too invested in 2018's Sonder, which probably was a little bit for a lack of trying. So we're 5 years out from that album, and I realized that it's been like 7 years since I was really excited about a new TesseracT album, which is crazy. But just digging into this album and understanding what went into War of Being, it's definitely understandable that it took this long. They may not be an Ariana Grande, an Ed Sheeran who can fill a 50,000 seat arena, but this is still a mega production with not just one producer, but like 5. They had a special vocal producer who worked directly with Dan. They even had a specialist who just mixed the vocals. And an 11-minute lead single with CGI video that looks like a PS5 cutscene, like 2 trained swordsmen, you got motion capture. And with the band's super long touring schedule and multiple continents, it makes sense again that this album just took a long time. Oh, and speaking of PS5, they also created a standalone virtual reality video game for this album. So they have gone all out. And on some levels, that mammoth effort totally paid off. I mean, this is one of the most pristinely executed albums in any genre I've ever heard. Every sound and every composition and arrangement choice just feels so intentional. Take the title track and lead single, or singles, because it's like 4 tracks in one. The riff that starts the song bleeds into a cinematic, spacious section. Then back to the riff with this sample platter of straight up screams and melodies and guttural growls. I love that section about 3.5 minutes in with the mathy kind of tapping thing where you can really hear the quivering of those low guitar strings. There's mentions of Tear the Mask Away. For as much as there is going on, there's actually just one droning root chord underneath all these minor riffs, which is a pretty common style for the band and really metal in general. But then they get to the actual chorus with the Tear the Mask Away, and the chords underneath start to shift and move around. It's really a great moment. They weave together these totally disparate parts that unravel linearly across the track. What I mean by that is, they don't return very often to sections earlier in the song. Instead of, the typical pop music structure, which is something like A, B, A, B, C, B. Instead, it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And this style and these long tracks lend themselves to the dynamic range of the band. You know, they go from soft to loud like nobody else. And these long tracks allow them to ebb and flow back and forth pretty seamlessly. Plus, Dan can go from delicate to devastating like it's nothing. I mean, he is just owning this performance that just shows every single little nook and cranny and facet of his voice. You know, I think it might end up being his career peak. There are frantic falsettos on the song Burden that morph into screams and then back to this powerful full voice. And same thing, but even to a more wicked extent on the song Legion, where Dan's screams turn into this almost painful, desperate, raspy yelp. I mean, it's just all over the place, but it does make sense given that he's playing multiple characters. And this is just a good idea. You know, if you have a vocalist with this kind of range, then you just got to go for a full-fledged concept album with all these characters. I'm sure they will need some background layering to make this vocal performance come to life live. The song Sirens is a highlight for me on the record, with that electronic beat and some of the best melodic lines on the album. The chorus is so simple and minimal and, you know, very unusual line there, but very effective. The female vocals really work for me, and that outro really conveys the emotion of lovers separated or, you know, torn apart by some turmoil, maybe war. The next song, Burden, also really hits hard as one of my favorites, and, you know, there's just so much space left in that groove that it really gives it some oomph. You know, it's not like heavy distortion, but it's that kind of rattly string sound that it just gets me. I'm usually not a huge scream vocal guy, but, you know, like Opeth, when it's mixed with different elements and sounds and melody, and not just that distorted, just high intensity scream the entire song, then I like it. So yeah, you know, I've said a lot of good things about this album, but you knew there was going to be a letdown. You knew there was going to be some cynical twist, some critique, some dagger in the back. As much as I'm in awe of this album, I think there are some problems that make me feel like it won't quite be as memorable as Altered State. First off, I feel like the concept is just impenetrable. You know, I've listened to a couple interviews with the bassist, Amos Williams, and all I can really glean is some, vague story of self-belief. Believing in your unique spirit and pursuing your authentic self regardless of what pressures of compromise and conformity face you in this life. You know, this is a very common view of what makes a good life nowadays, you know, just your authentic self as your guiding principle. And even if I really bought in, really believed in that ideology, which I don't, but even if I did, if I'm not able to clearly see or hear how that story is being played out in the characters, then the emotional impact, the intention there just doesn't land. I'm not someone who can very easily track a fictional narrative through song lyrics. You know, I'm a good music listener in many ways, but that is not one of my strengths. So if someone has a Reddit thread or a cheat sheet of some kind, I'd love to see it. But hey, there are a lot of concept albums that I love despite not being able to track every little detail and nuance of the fictional world. Coheed and Cambria is a great example. So my critique goes beyond messaging or story or lyrics. You know, it's this is where it gets a little more intangible, but really it's just I don't connect with these songs as much as I did with old Tesseract. I think it's a musical thing, really, for me. You know, probably some pretty simple things like chords, melodies, and just songwriting overall. I've listened countless times, and it's just not grabbing me in the way that I'd expect for an album that sounds this incredible. Any music reviewer kind of prides themselves on being analytical and being able to parse out why they do or don't like something, but sometimes it's just inexplicable, you know, sometimes it's just purely emotional. And sometimes this beautiful mystery of songwriting is just that. I gotta say though, they have really stuck to an original sound throughout their career, which I admire a lot, and all the hallmarks of the best Tesseract are definitely in this album. A, for authenticity, but overall I'm more in awe of this album than I am in love with it. And really curious if others feel the same way. So it's hard to rate, I don't feel like a number really does the experience justice, but I like it, I don't love it, so probably around a 7. And that's it for this new TesseracT album. I hope you are just thrilled with this thing. I know I am in certain ways, but I hope it's really just connecting with you on a personal level, on an emotional level. Let me know what you thought of the album, if there are other progressive metal albums or acts that I should check out in this vein, because they are one of my favorites. And as always, thank you so much for watching.